Hey, what's up, everybody? It's BDF44. So, if you follow me by now, you know that sometimes I have really deep topics or topics that are more or less made up before I press record. This is not one of those days. I just kind of wanted to press record and see what comes of it. And in the past, I've had some decent success with doing things this way, so I'm just going to run with it. What's on my mind right now is I've been paying attention to characteristics and things of that nature within this whole, Black Lives Matter movement and all that stuff, as I normally talk about. And one of the things that I want to discuss today is just the differences uh, in between what it means to feel offended versus some other groups' absorption of what it means to be offended and how they feel about being offended. Because I think that's where some disconnect is in this country between um, a lot of African American citizens and a lot of Caucasian citizens. Um, Regardless of what side they're on, it's just something that I've noticed, and I don't think there's a real way to put a blanketed understanding over groups of people and how they feel about things. But what you can do is look at sentiments that are often shared and see the similarities within the statements and the sentiments that are being shared, um, and then try to make some sense of what it is you're looking at. So this is by no means a perfect science or anything of that nature. It's just something that I've noticed within individuals that I've seen comment on different things, and it's become clear to me that, and this is not a hot take, but certain disenfranchised groups tend to just absorb offense differently than that of the majority. Um, Tend to. It means different things to be offended. And it's not a sensitivity conversation as much as it is just a difference in culture, a difference in what makes you tick, a difference in where your pride lies, that kind of thing. Like, I look at this country and how people are interacting today, just literally today as I'm looking around online. A lot of what's being talked about is what's going on in Portland. There's some Black Lives Matter protests taking place, a very large gathering out there. And I saw another post about how they were sending in these huge police contraptions of some sort. It looked like some type of bulldozer with a wall attached to it where the shovel would otherwise be, a big blue wall, and on top of that wall you see like someone who would be able to sit up there and hose water down on the protesters or the rioters. That's what that thing is meant for, to kind of just push people along. It's a huge wall. It takes up about an entire street intersection type of thing. Like, it's huge, and it just pushes people along and sprays them as they go. And on this particular post is highly right wing, I believe. Highly conservative, and they were in support of it. But just looking at what's going on in Portland, not to get derailed, but it's like, when people sit and say certain things like, "Oh, I don't understand why you keep complaining. You need to just you know, take what daddy gives you," that kind of thing. I saw a post that had that type of statement attached to it. It's just, it gets to a point where it's like, for us being offended, our pride is attached to our heritage, our culture, how the words that are used to degrade us and how we don't want them used. And it's just a real big thing to not use certain words. Well, as to where if you're the majority and you think like some of these individuals that I've seen, your mindset is more so of, I'm not sensitive about names you call me. You can call me all kinds of derogatory names about my race. I could care less. But what you're not going to do is disrespect my symbols, the symbols that matter to me, my flags, my statues, my principles as it pertains to what I feel the country should be doing, how it should be going about its business, different things. That's what upsets me when you test my patriotism. That's the sentiment that I'm receiving from a lot of individuals. As to where on our side, it's like, yo, the symbols don't mean as much to us per se. We don't care if you snatch our images off, any images used to make fun of us off of various products and things of that nature, because those symbols don't hold as much weight. Our offense and our pride is not attached to those symbols. So you can do whatever you want to do with those symbols. We're so more interested in making sure that you treat us a certain way, that you speak of us a certain way, that our image is portrayed a certain way, that we're given a certain level of respect, even though we don't have the buying power and the requisite leverage to demand a certain level of respect or what have you. Like, it's more so about respect, pride, and being accepted and welcomed, and or the pride of being standing alone away from the majority, or what have you. Various different people inside this group, so to speak, or our race feel differently, of course, and but the sentiment and what makes us offended and what it means to be offended, it's just an entirely different thing. So when we try to interact with one another, I tend to see individuals missing that understanding, or we just could care less. I'm not assuming everybody is ignorant in that regard. Some just don't care, and that's another conversation entirely. But when we're trying to communicate and trying to figure out how we can find some common ground, these type of characteristics are the type of things that we need to kind of give some credence to. Again, it's not a perfect science. It's not something that's going to help you understand everybody, not by any stretch of the imagination. If anything, it's just an advanced, stereotyping, more or less, I guess. But what I try to pay attention to mostly is just how people react to certain things. And if we can come around to just starting to understand one another a little better as it pertains to the things that make us offended, the things that we attach our pride to, I think we can start to really gain some ground in this situation. Ground in terms of communication and opening up doors for one another to start to understand better and start to come around, to start knocking down some of those walls that keep us from being able to really see eye to eye or have a connected goal for where we want to go. I think that's what I hope for personally. It doesn't mean that I see that happening or that's what everybody else is saying. I don't know. What I hope we can do is, if we can't agree on what's fair, if we can't agree on how we want things to be today, if we can't agree on respecting one another based on whatever those issues are, I would love to see both sides have a connected destination for where they want this thing to go. Because it doesn't seem to have any direction right now. It's just people yelling back and forth at each other, calling each other names, and applying the very same logic to different subjects that fit their various agendas. It'll literally be the same exact talking points. If this person weren't that person, they'd be treated this way. There are good people in this group. Why don't you give credence to those good people when considering the group itself? Exclude those bad people in our group because they don't make up the majority of us and they don't represent us. Like, that's what both sides are saying. Or things along the lines of, if you take accountability for what it is that you do, then you won't have as many issues. That's exactly what both sides are saying to one another. So that tells me that the humanity of the circumstance and the commonality of wishes are literally the same. The only problem is they're inverted in who and what to prioritize. using these two groups, Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, just as an example, since it's the one that's prevalent today. Good cops don't deserve to have their jobs snatched from them, don't deserve to be murdered in the name of police brutality because they're not the ones doing the brutality and all of that. And even though good cops often protect bad cops, we also know that good cops are kind of forced to do so in a lot of cases. Their lives and their families' lives can literally be on the line in certain instances if they open their mouths. So it's like, not every situation is as fluent as just let me open my mouth and tell on my brothers or tell on my fellow guards or what have you. So it's one of those situations where it's like, that's what they're saying. We're saying on this side, yes, we do hurt one another in regards to black on black crime, but that's proximity, and we didn't create those circumstances. We didn't give ourselves those guns. We didn't put those liquor stores in our communities to make it so that we're drunk all the time and things of that nature. It's not our fault we're in the position we're in. It's not our fault we're as ignorant as we are. It's not our fault. It's a lot of pay attention to what we're asking you to pay attention to, and do not retort to us about who needs to take responsibility for their very own actions, because from our perspective, you are in control of what it is that we're dealing with. And not only that, but you're also not taking responsibility for any of the injustices that we're calling you out for. So that's what the Black Lives Matter side is saying. But you can see, even though the scales aren't balanced, and I love bringing that up, the score has to be even in order for you to clearly divvy out an even number of what is necessary on both sides. In other words, if I killed 7 of your dogs and you killed 1 of mine, and then we start the process of trying to see what's fair, needless to say, it's going to be very difficult to just start from scratch with these two circumstances being as they are. So from my perspective, we have to find some understanding to that part, because as long as that is in the way, we will never find a balance to what it is that is in front of us. So that's just one thing I've come to understand, to be honest with you. It's not something I appreciate, but there's no way for the scales to be balanced or for the score to be even. But we do have to find a way to make that right so that we can go forward. And that's what a lot of people on the African American side are saying. Like, don't tell us about killing ourselves. Don't tell us about the bad guys in our community. Don't tell us about such and such and such and such. Because we're trying to focus on something else. And, to be honest with you, I do agree being on this side, but at the same time, it's like, well, does that mean that we're doing no wrong? Do we convince ourselves that everything we're doing is fine and that we don't have any responsibility to ourselves? Because if that's the case, then if we can't control ourselves, what makes us think we're going to be able to handle anything regardless of what's coming? Whether it be some sort of inherited power or overthrow of the government of some sort, we're not going to be any better off without an oppressor if we're not willing to hold ourselves accountable for anything that we do. So there has to be some balance there. If we're going to ask to hold others accountable, then accountability must be held on our end one way or another. Now, how to properly assess that accountability is not something that I've been able to do, and that is also a conundrum. To assess the accountability, you have to, again, take a look at the circumstances and put individuals in the position to do whatever it is that they're not supposed to. You know what I mean? It's very easy for me to say I did something wrong, but then if you start digging deep into why I ended up doing something wrong, you can see I was coerced into it, pushed into it, manipulated all kinds of different ways. And that's something that we need to be honest about in assessing both sides. The manipulation tactics that are taking place on the Black Lives Matter side of individuals who don't have control over their own circumstances for whatever set of reasons. And that's something that a lot of people don't see. That it's hard when you're on the Blue Lives Matter side to understand that aspect when you're not in these communities, when you don't know people who are from these communities, when you have your feelings attached to something other than the humanity of African American people. It's kind of hard to see it that way. Um, and two, propaganda makes it very difficult. You know, when you look on TV, you see nothing but certain images, or you look on posts and you see nothing but certain types of cops. It can make it very difficult for you to be objective on either side. You know, I look up and I know for a fact there are individuals who are trying to pin people against one another on both sides. People who claim to be a part of each position but will only post divisive posts, energy that will otherwise further piss people off, energy that would other divide people. I see it on both sides. I can see it on my side with some people who post nothing but evil cops doing evil stuff, and that is in and of itself unfortunately very necessary because we're still trying to raise awareness for what's taking place. But there is a line that is possible to cross when you get to a point where you oversaturate feeds with images that only provide one-sided perspectives. And that's not something people want to pay attention to too much when they're passionate about what it is that they're fighting for, especially when they're right. But it's something that needs to be discussed in order to weed out the snakes within these various groups. Because a lot of times you will have people who infiltrate these groups and will try to keep people at odds so that they can sell them something, so that they can take advantage of it, so that they can manipulate their own way. There are people who make a lot of money off of conflict, wars, and things of that nature. Without those things, they're not making money. So they're going to make sure they communicate with both sides. They're going to make fake burner accounts to promote information to either side. You know what I mean? And that information is going to be one-sided. It's going to be hate the cops, F the ends, which would be us. And then people walk away from their prospective corners on a murder mission, just like I've said in previous videos. When you get to that point where you're no longer looking to communicate, but you're more so looking to fight, you've already lost. You've already lost. You put yourself in a position to act out. You put yourself in a position to be mistaken or wrong. You put yourself in a position to be one-sided and jaded, and thus it's going to back you into a situation where you're just flat out incorrect. And that's what you want to keep from happening. If we gotta fight, let it be an organic fight. Let it not be because we've oversaturated ourselves with negativity and now we just leave our corners and get ready to fight for that. Like, that's not it. There are real things going on, and there's good things going on. And if we're going to fight this thing, we got to be cognizant of the nuances within the circumstances and the fluidity of good and evil on both sides. And that's what it is. That's what I've learned to understand. This is not an easy subject. Again, like I said, the scales are not balanced. On one side, we're fighting for the lives of a profession, for the livelihoods of a profession. On the other side, we're fighting for human rights. As an African American person, at this stage in the game, I almost feel like I'm on the sidelines, watching all of this happening, being the symbol of a fight between two different halves of a majority. It's kind of how it feels at this point. Like, it didn't start that way, but since it has gone viral, since Black Lives Matter is now corporate in just about every way, now it just feels like it's a fight amongst the majority, to be honest. And with that comes other agendas that are attached to the agenda, and it leaves us kind of looking on the outside, from the outside looking in, which is it's just a gift and a curse, to be honest, from my perspective, because we don't really make any real decisions on our own in terms of being able to move the needle. We never have universal blackness on anything because there's too many different various types of people with different various mindsets, different agendas, different allegiances. So you're never going to have a clear set, this is the black people's side. We're just not wired that way, unfortunately. And I do say that purposefully, unfortunately. But it is what it is. It would be nice if all of us could at least be on one accord about how we want this thing to go and how we should be treated. But there are African Americans out there who tend to either feel more comfortable on the conservative / white / not so liberal side. Some individuals who have their livelihoods wrapped up in the in the business of individuals on the other side, and they're not gonna betray that for something that doesn't mean as much to them for whatever reason, so on and so forth. So yeah, we need. I said all that to say we need the majority to take up this fight for us. But in doing so, we understand that there's no real super passion deeper than that of the experience of the person who's actually going through what they're going through, or the people that are going through what they're going through. And I saw something that kind of added up a little bit. It's not going to be very popular, but it does feel that way as a black person. It feels like the Black Lives Matter movement has now morphed into a low-key or covert, as this was put, LGBT community / women's rights movement. Black people just happen to be the face of it, but those who are fighting and those who have their agendas mixed up in this thing are no longer people who are interested in putting black injustices first. So that is something that I'm paying attention to and am open-minded about looking at going forward. All in all, I just hope that with the hijacking, so to speak, of the Black Lives Matter movement, that they will have the similar effect as the abolitionist movement did, to where the majority took up that fight, made it their own, and won it. So that was really, really, really monumental. So how powerful whites can be when they come together for whatever it is that they're fighting for. And if it happens to be someone else, good things happen for that group. So I don't shun supporters, whatever their point of view is, or whatever label they hold themselves to, whatever their identity is. I'm happy that they want to be a part of what it is that we're trying to do. I just hope that we don't get lost in the process, being that we're no longer the forefront of it at this point. So yeah, that sums up all of my thoughts, I guess. Just paying attention. People are offended by different things, and people hold offense differently. And to tie everything in at the end of this video, I just hope that once we start to understand these people, one another better, I think we can start really doing some good things. But until we try to learn one another, until we try to communicate or find ways of knocking down the walls of communication, we're gonna have a very tough time being objective and identifying that there are similarities on both sides. The humanity is there. When a Blue Lives Matter person sees a cop being treated poorly, they're up in arms, they're hurt, they feel for that person. If they're a decent human being, that is. Black Lives Matter people, we don't want to see another George Floyd. I think that kind of goes without saying. Nobody wants to see that. The humanity is there. We don't want to see any more of that. So you can see where we apply that. At the same time, there are people on our side who will see a post of a cop getting killed and start laughing. You know what I mean? They look at it as anything that opposes their understanding of what the Black Lives Matter movement is. Then it can go kick rocks, and I don't feel like that's a good representation of us. And I think it's hypocritical of us to be that way, and then look at those on the other side who apply that same energy towards one of our very own, and then call them out for being callous, or call them out for being ridiculous, or what have you. A human is a human is a human. There's no all lives matter jargon here in regards to that, but the sentiment of what it means certainly lives and embodies in myself. I do believe that everybody should have their say. I do believe everybody should be given an opportunity to feel heard and respected, and have their story be told, and have their history be honest to them, honest about who they were, rather. Too bad a lot of us don't feel that way. Too bad a lot of us would rather point out the bad in various groups and omit the good, or point out what fits the narrative as opposed to what is actually taking place. And the last thing I want to say before I leave is two things can exist at one time. I think a lot of times when we get caught up in these arguments, it's an either or situation, and both circumstances will be right, and people will be passionate and believe they're right because they are. Where they're wrong is thinking that the other person is wrong when they're also right. It's a lot of that going on in between within this conversation. You see that so much. So I just felt like it was important to say that to everybody, anywhere. Two things can exist at once. It doesn't have to be either or. It can be, but it doesn't have to be every time. Anyway, my name is BDF. Thanks for watching that, and I'm out.